So, earlier you've talked about the notion of having a product hook and a distribution trick.
Mhm.
I've also heard you say, can it explode? And
Mhm.
I guess on some level, product hook and a distribution trick or a multiplier effect that's like kind of the nitrous oxide poured onto the flammable mixture. But are there any other things that you think are relevant to the question of whether something do you have to answer questions other than product hook and distribution trick to kind of get a sense of comfort that something can explode?
Well, the product hook and the distribution trick give you the initial wedge into the market, but you're
Yep.
by no means like finished once you have that. That's really just the
Right.
starting point. And there's so many other things that you have to add. So I think with respect to SaaS or enterprise software, I think a major difference between enterprise and consumer is what I call the race to completeness,
Mm.
where enterprise buyers want to buy a complete product, something that solves the problem that they're paying for, that they're paying to solve. And so whereas a consumer product can remain extremely simple, like Twitter basically hasn't changed much in, a
Yeah.
dozen years. And that's fine. People don't necessarily want it messed with. Enterprise products are constantly in this race to be more feature complete than their competitors. And because, part of the sales process is you'll be in a bake off against some competitor, and there'll be feature checklists that the buyer has. And, you'll have your battle card of you versus the competitor, and, checking more boxes than the competition is a real thing.
Yeah.
And so, the product trick and the distribution trick are really just about getting that initial wedge into the market, but then you need to race to get to some idea of a complete offering before, your competitors just assimilate whatever little tricks you figured out.
Yeah.
And so, just having the product and distribution tricks isn't enough. You've got to solidify that. And, in order to figure out, what is a complete offering, well, you've got to have some sense then of like, what is your market, like, and so you're going to kind of like reverse engineer based on, and this is where you want to look at kind of the initial users. Well, who's actually using my product? Who's getting the most value out of it? And you could be a little bit flexible about, what is the market that you're actually creating. You don't have to come in with too many preconceived notions, but once you figure out what that market actually is, you race to create the most complete offering so someone can't come in and kind of take it away from you.
And is part of it. So I remember one time, this is a long time ago when I first met Sean Parker. He had this way of thinking about explosive growth. He used to say that a perfectly engineered viral network, and maybe this isn't the right time and place to talk with this metaphor, but it infects the entire population, right? It gets every relevant person in the market to adopt it quickly. Is that kind of how you were thinking about? Yeah. So you got to be feature complete, but you also want to have enough user base that you're in the pole position to deliver the feature complete product. They have to move from you rather than to you.
So yeah, Sean is kind of the master, or, back in this time period was the absolute master of viral growth. Before being president of Facebook, he had created a company called Plaxo, which was
Sure.
this early address book importer that was incredibly viral because it would spam your whole address book. And so Sean was very focused on the viral coefficient. And he's right that if your viral coefficient is greater than 1 for any reasonable length of time, and the cycle time is short,
Yep.
eventually infect the entire population. And so that would be like a perfect viral product. We never got anything close to that. I think it's much harder in the enterprise to create a complete product, but and we weren't necessarily looking for that. We were looking for lift. I mean, we were looking for a multiplier and, a way to kind of get this initial wedge into the market. And so, even though our virality wasn't close to perfect, we, and one of the reasons why it wasn't is because the virality was intra-company. It wasn't inter-company. So we still had to get some initial non-viral adoption. We had to kind of get that patient zero inside of every company to then spread it. And so it was never going to be a perfect viral product, but it certainly was, sort of viral enough to kind of change the game,
Yeah.
because, once you kind of got that first user inside a company who's willing to spread it, it could grow very fast. And you could get to a critical mass of users. And then that triggered a sales conversation with IT. And so, it was, I guess what I'd say about virality in enterprise software is it doesn't have to be perfect in order for you to get a big multiplier from it.
Hmm. And I guess it becomes more critical in consumer, or at least in some of these network effects products, because otherwise you got to compensate for that with marketing spend. And if you've
That's right.
got a bajillion potential users, right, your acquisition costs go through the roof.
Yes, exactly. So I think one of the things that's really hard about consumer products is that the average user doesn't have that much value,
Yeah.
because either because it's an ad supported model, the user's not paying you directly, so they're indirectly monetized, or, maybe they're paying for the product, but they have high churn because consumer services typically have very high churn. So either way, there's just not like a huge long-term value associated with any particular user. And so if you're paying for users, if the only distribution you can get is through paid channels, those businesses just tend not to work. They tend not to get to very big scale. It's just prohibitively expensive to buy that distribution. That's why I think all the really big consumer companies figure it out how to explode virally without paying for users.
Yeah.
It's almost like, if you see a consumer company advertising, there must be something wrong with it, you know? Uh,
Yeah. Well, and
um,
it reminds me of that chart that some people do where they say, 0.99 to the millionth, or, 0.99 to the 100th power is this tiny little number, and 1.01 to the 100th power is this massively huge. It's
that's right.
like being even slightly less than a coefficient of one means you have to compensate with marketing programs, and over one means, it's infinity, right? It's just
Right.
anybody who wants it, you're going to get to.
Yeah.
Um,
But that actually was the point I made about mass in the context of COVID. Sorry to shift gears for a second, but
yeah.
the what one of the studies on mass found was that the viral coefficient on the disease dropped below 1. I think it was like 0.8 or 0.9 with a fastidious mass policy,
Yep.
whereas it was over 1 without mass, even if you did a bunch of other things like social distancing. And so for anybody who understands viral loops, the difference between 1.1 and 0.9 as a viral, that's not
Yeah.
0.2. It's whether you are, you know, viral or not viral, whether you're going to like be explosive or peter out, whether you're going to have a hockey
Yeah.
stick or whether it's just going to, or, whether the curve basically will just plateau. And so, yeah, it's true in the context of COVID. It's the reason why I advocated, a mass policy 4 months ago, but it's also very much true in the context of these consumer products. So yeah, it's like, you either figure out a way as a consumer product to get widespread free distribution, or, the businesses tend not to work that well because it's just too expensive. Now, enterprise software, SaaS, is different because the customers have a lot more long-term value. Assuming churn is low, you might keep that customer forever. And then there's this beautiful dynamic with cohorts where, okay, there may be some logo churn, but seat expansion from the customers who stay with you might offset that
Yeah.
logo churn. So your cohorts just keep compounding every year. And so the long-term value of these customers is huge, and they're willing to pay. They pay for the
Yeah.
software,
And
and they can
and
pay
the
out.
and potentially their switching costs are higher,
The
right? As you
switching costs,
start to,
yeah,
yeah, you get integrated with all their other stuff.
right, exactly. So, I mean, it's why SaaS is really a beautiful model. Is you have all these customers who stay with you forever. They're willing to pay a lot, and they're willing to increase what their contract values every year. And as a result of that,
It's
you
not
can.
their money.
It's not their money, yeah. And because of that, you can actually afford to spend a lot on distribution, and that's why a sales team pencils for an enterprise software company. Is you can actually afford people. You can afford to pay people to go out and knock on doors. And that was the thing about Yammer that really appealed to me, even back in, what is it, like 2008, 2009, is the idea of just getting users to, or getting companies to pay for it. That to me seemed like this really novel idea back in those days. And, you know, And so, yeah, it turned out to work pretty well.